Hi, today in the next episode of this series, Exponential Economy, today we'll be talking about modern monetary theory. What it is, find out after the break. What is a modern monetary theory? In short, MMT. This is kind of a new paradigm of thinking about economy, about the role of the state in the economy, and about the financial and fiscal policy of the government. And this is kind of a socialistic or communistic way of thinking about government, which becomes, unfortunately, more and more popular in today's world. The traditional economy sees a government as a body that needs some money to sustain itself, its activities, and so to fund the government, they need to tax the population, to tax the people, right? And if it is not enough, then the government can, of course, finance itself by debt, issuing bonds and then getting money for the bonds, and of course to pay it later on when the economy grows, and from the future earnings or from the future taxation, so to say. But the modern monetary theory has a different view of this reality and of the relationship between government and the population. It generally states that government can buy goods, services, or any asset by just printing its own money and without the need of taxation. So instead of introducing taxes or getting the money to spend, why should you tax people? You could just print new money and spend that, right? And so this is the first one. The second statement of MMT is that the government can't go bankrupt because it can always print more money, right? So if there is a debt payment due, the government can print new money and then pay for that debt, right? Pay off the debt and then get maybe new debt or whatever. The only limiting parameter may be unemployment and the inflation. But the modern monetary theory, MMT, says that unemployment is the cause of not enough money in the economy. So if you provide more money to the economy, you can reduce the unemployment or maybe eradicate the unemployment because then there is money, people get money, or businesses can get more money, can employ more people, and they can save more, they can invest more, and that's how you reduce unemployment. So generally, the only limit is the inflation that may follow if you put into the economy too much money. But then the fourth postulate of MMT is that you can reduce the inflation by taxation. So the taxation is not needed to finance the government in that theory, in that thinking. It is needed to withdraw the money from the market, from the circulation that you have pumped into circulation generally by your own spending as a government. So by withdrawing that money from the circulation, you lower the inflation. And the last postulate is that when you look at that from that perspective of what I have said before, then the government doesn't compete with the private sector for scarce resources, or doesn't need to compete, because it generally can pay any price on the market. It can just print money and pay any price for anything. So private sector can't compete with government for buying anything because it has to earn its money, and government doesn't have to earn its money. It just prints the money, right? So that's why, for example, you can get a hammer. U.S. Army pays for a hammer over $1,000. A hammer that you could get in a normal store for $2, $3, $5 maybe. Maybe it's a special hammer, I don't know, maybe $10, $15, right? But when official, when a state institution buys the same or similar merchandise, similar goods, they can pay 100 times as much as you would pay in a normal market, as a private enterprise, private company would pay for the same goods, because they can spend as much as they want, and they don't compete with others, right? And Alan Greenspan, actually, the head of Fed, once said the United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability of default. So if you follow these thoughts, you will realize that in that paradigm, in that thinking, taxation is not needed to fund the government. It is only a policy tool to regulate inflation and unemployment. There are a lot of technicalities about MMT. MMT is just, let's say, a vision, maybe a rough understanding of how economy could work, how government could work. Of course, in today's world, it's not a pure MMT that governments use. They still issue bonds in order to get new money from the central banks. They don't print the money themselves. There is still the division between state and at least a formal division between state and a central bank. And so in theory, governments can't issue money by will, but in reality they can. But of course the consequence of that is inflation. And for example, in the year 2020, United States increased the money supply of dollar by 20%. So it means it printed over 20% of new money into existence from nothing, from created just new money to finance its activities, to finance their programs, their spending generally. And of course it causes inflation. And you can see that in the prices of real estate, in the prices of stocks, and partly you start seeing that in the consumer prices of normal consumption goods, cost of living, and so on. So the enemy of that theory is of course cryptocurrencies, is of course Bitcoin, because as soon as people see that their money gets inflated by the government, and the government taxes them in order to limit that inflation, and the government can print as much money as they want, and the other people, the private sector, needs to work for that money, to earn that money in order to pay the taxes. But the government, they can do anything they want, they can spend as much as they want because they can always print the money. So people start thinking about that and start investing or escaping to real assets, to assets that can't get inflated. And one of these assets, maybe the most attractive, maybe the most popular, maybe the most promising one, is Bitcoin. And that's why Bitcoin is a big enemy of the disciples of MMT and of the governments, who of course want to use MMT, who are in support of MMT, because MMT supports their needs. MMT actually gives a justification for government spending, for what government does, and of course releases the officials of any responsibility and accountability for their spending, right? Because they print their own money. They don't say, okay, the money we spend, this is the taxpayers' money, this is the money people have to work for, to pay taxes and so on. No, we are spending our money that we print, and we tax the people just to limit the inflation. So this is a very comfortable, very sleek excuse for the government, and this theory is very comfortable for government officials, and they are of course in support of that theory, of the notions of that theory, of the thoughts behind that theory, also the vocabulary that that theory uses. I wonder what you think about MMT and about the conflict of MMT and Bitcoin. Let's discuss about that in the comments below this video. Give me a thumb up if you like this video, thumb down if you didn't, subscribe if you haven't, but first of all subscribe to the newsletter. Here the link below this video, because YouTube does not notify people about new videos. Even if you press the ring button, you need to get the notifications from me. I will notify you about every video, maybe some live event from time to time, and about news, maybe about my books. So share this video with your loved ones, with your friends. One day they will thank you for that. I talk here a lot about economy, about money, about thinking big, about doing great, impossible things in your life and business. I talk here about how billionaires of our times think and act. I have to do with billionaires on everyday basis. So if you like this video, you will like my other videos. I invite you to watch them. That's it for today. Wish you a fantastic day. Let's do something extraordinary today.